All right, welcome back. Last time we spoke, we got you all introduced to the concept of Agile project management, where we discussed definable versus high uncertainty work. We dove into what the Agile methodology is and took a pretty in-depth history lesson on the origins of Agile. Then we also discussed the benefits of the Agile method as well as when not to use Agile. So hopefully everyone's feeling good about that. But today we're going to peel back another layer and go a little bit deeper. So let's get started. By the way, you all are going to get really sick and tired of hearing me say Agile in this module. So just be prepared for that. Today we're going to discuss uncertainty, risk, and life cycle selection, building agile workflows and project plans, project and team charters, and then some common agile practices that you might see. Our learning objectives for today are review project uncertainty and risk impacts, analyze agile approaches for uncertain projects, apply incremental methods to reduce risk, evaluate project life cycles for complexity, and create agile project plans with workflows. All right. Every project comes with some degree of uncertainty and risk. And the level to which we believe that uncertainty and risk may arise could dictate the life cycle selection that we make for our projects. Some projects have considerable uncertainty around project requirements and how to fulfill those requirements using current knowledge and technology. Those uncertainties can contribute to really high rates of change in project complexity. We learned about that in the previous lecture. And as project uncertainty increases, so too does the risk of rework and the need to use a different approach. The image on the right is what is called an uncertainty and complexity model, which is heavily inspired by something called the Stacy complexity model. Effectively, what this model is showing is in order to mitigate the impact of project risks, teams choose to select life cycles that allow them to tackle projects with high amounts of uncertainty through much smaller increments of work. That should sound familiar, a lot like the Agile process that we outlined in the previous lecture. So teams can also verify their work when they use smaller increments and can change or adapt to what they ultimately do next. Meaning that when teams deliver in smaller increments, they are better able to understand the true customer requirements much faster and more accurately than with a more static, sequential, or waterfall method where written specifications are sort of spelled out at the very beginning of the project. There's not really an understanding on the team level in some situations how that project should be completed. So when change happens, it sort of creates chaos. Teams can also plan and manage projects with clear and more stable requirements and clearer technical challenges with much less difficulty. However, it is important to note that as the uncertainty of the project increases, the likelihood of changes, wasted work, and potentially even rework also increases, which can be very, very costly and time-consuming. Some teams have evolved their project life cycles to use iterative and incremental approaches. Many teams discover that when they explore the requirements iteratively and deliver more often, in other words, incrementally, the project team adapts to changes much, much easier. And these iterative and incremental approaches do wonders at reducing waste and rework within a project because the team gains feedback multiple times throughout the project at each iteration rather than waiting until the project launches at the very end. Again, this is why the Agile methodology is really a subset of lean project management due to its focus on lean thinking. That said, these more agile approaches tend to use all or some combinations of very short feedback loops, frequent adaptation of process, reprioritization, regularly updated plans, and frequent delivery. None of that should sound new to you. But what do simple, complicated, and complex projects mean? Well, let's consider a large project, something like the Boston Big Dig, which was a construction project to sort of rework the roadway or highway infrastructure within the city of Boston. On the surface, the project seemed fairly straightforward. Move the elevated highway underground. There was a high degree of agreement on the requirements and very low uncertainty on how the project would proceed until the project started. And as is the case for many large projects, the project encountered surprises along the way. When a team works on a project where there is little opportunity for interim deliverables or little opportunity for prototyping and testing, the team most likely will use a sequential life cycle in order to manage that. The team can adapt to what it discovers, but it will not be able to use an agile approach to manage a surprise discovery or the incremental nature of solving that unplanned problem. The Big Dig project was not simple by any means. However, many projects that start out in the lower left part of the Stacy complexity model have no real means of moving to other approaches. So it's really important, even with sequential projects, to stop. Assess the project, both in the requirements and in the means of delivery. Then determine the best approach for the life cycle of the project. These iterative, incremental, and agile approaches generally work best for projects that involve new or novel tools, maybe even new techniques or materials or application domains, but they also work well for projects that require research and development, or have high rates of change, or have unclear or unknown requirements, uncertainty, or risk, or even that have a final goal that is potentially a little bit hard to describe. I'm sure we've all run into a project like that where it's like, all of those words were real words, but what was the actual meaning there? And you really don't understand what the final deliverable ought to be. By building a small increment and then testing and reviewing it, the team can explore uncertainty at a low cost in a very short amount of time. They can reduce risk and maximize business value delivery. This uncertainty may be centered on suitability and requirements, and a good question to ask is the right product being built? But then uncertainty may also be centered on technical feasibility and performance. Can this product be built this way? Or maybe process and people. Is this an effective way for the team to work on this project? All three of these characteristics, product specification, product capability, and process suitability, typically have elements of very high uncertainty. However, iterative and incremental approaches have their limits of applicability. When both technology uncertainty and requirements uncertainty are very, very high, the project moves beyond complex and into just chaos. So, in order for the project to become reliably possible, it needs one of the uncertainty variables to be contained somewhere within the green boxes here. But as soon as we head northeast on this axis here, you're in chaos territory. You don't want to be there. So let's say we've decided to choose Agile as our project approach. Now it's time to create your first Agile workflow and project plan. As you all have been around the block in this class already, so this graphic really should not look new to you. It's generally easiest to develop a project plan before you create any workflows, as the project will sort of identify which workflows and phases your project might need. For right now, we're just going to take a look at the first 3 steps because that is really where the Agile workflow and project plans are built. The Agile project plan's role is very similar to that of any traditional project plan in a lot of ways. Firstly, an Agile project begins with a pre-planning step. There's at least a dozen names that you may hear for this stage, but we'll call this initiation. And this is where the project vision is both defined and documented. This is also where known business and technical requirements should also be documented. This phase of basic project planning is also when your project team members will most likely be assigned. High-level estimates for budget, time, and scope should also be gathered and documented during the initiation phase, and your project team will then determine the number of sprints or iterations that they believe will be required for the project. And they should also outline the length of each sprint and the expected deliverable or outcome. The big difference between Agile and traditional project methodologies comes after high-level planning is done. For an Agile project, you'll plan only the initial sprint in detail rather than the entire project. Under Agile, it's only after each sprint is completed that the next sprint's details are then planned out. And this iterative process enables your project team to adapt each sprint plan based on the previous sprint's outcomes. So really, you're not planning the next sprint until the first sprint has been completed. And the sprint details of your plan should be put into your project management tool. In this class, we're going to be using Notion a lot, or sort of as our project management tool, but you may also want to put that in your team or project charter if you have one of those set up, which you probably should. Once your project plan is complete, it's time to set up the proper project management workflows within your workspace. For instance, if you will be using the Scrum framework, you'll now need to create your Scrum workflow. If you'll be using a Kanban framework, you'll need to set up a Kanban workflow. And workflows really just ensure that tasks and activities move through the right people and sort of move through them at the right time and that the work is properly completed and tracked. Since Agile best practices recommend an iterative and incremental approach, your workflow in an Agile framework needs to accommodate cycles of work. A standard workflow would often assume that a task would move from in progress to in review to complete, but with Agile project planning, you may need to exchange tasks between in progress and in review several times before they ever get to the complete phase. And it's critical that whatever project management tool or software you're using can handle this without losing visibility of the project's progress. Here's an example of my Kanban board and the swim lanes that I've set up for designing and building this class. I actually just had to use this today to sort of check off some of the lectures that I had already recorded because we're recording these lectures in a nonlinear fashion. We started filming Module 4 first, and then we filmed Module 2. Right now we're filming Module 3. Then we have to go back and film Module 1, and ultimately we'll film Module 5. So, as the time, or sort of at the time this screenshot was taken, I was in the middle of designing this lecture 3.2. And you can see that at the top of the lecture design column, you've got, technically it's 2.1. I ended up having to move a couple of things down because I added some content in Module 1. So you see Module 2.1, Introduction to Agile Methodologies, and then right below that, Lecture 2.2, Delivering in an Agile Environment. But what's nice about that is now you're seeing that it's Module 3. I had the flexibility to move things around because the requirements changed. I needed to add business of design to Module 1, and we had to move some things around. That's the beauty of Agile. I was not stressed about that in any means, but it just means that I have to go through and update a few things. But also notice how information is somewhat trapped at the Q&A, review, and testing stage. That's because before I can mark anything as complete, I first need to record all of my lectures and then upload them. Then the task can be marked as complete. This also gives me the flexibility to pull things out of completion and sort of, if an error is found after the assignment is completed, I get you guys sometimes coming to me and saying, hey, this thing didn't make sense or it didn't tie in. That's fine. I value that. I appreciate that. Bring those to me because I work Agile and I can move things around very, very quickly and easily. Those changes are not stressful because of the methodology that I've used to build and design this class. Once created, you can use these workflows along with a project dashboard like this. This one's a Kanban board to easily track your project's overall progress. Now, every project needs a project charter. So the project team knows why this project matters, where the team is headed, and sort of what the project objective is. Oftentimes in a design or engineering environment, this charter is referred to as a problem statement, or I've heard a couple of different ones, like a challenge statement, if you don't want to focus on the negative problem. However, problem statements are quite different. However, the project charter itself may not be enough for the team. Agile teams sometimes require team norms and an understanding of how they ought to work together. In that case, the team might need what's called a team charter. The chartering process really helps the team learn how to work together and coalesce around the project. At a minimum for an Agile project, the team needs the project vision or purpose and a very clear set of working agreements. An Agile project charter really aims to answer these questions. Number one, is the project vision? Why are we doing this project? Number two is the project purpose. Who benefits and how? Number three is the definition of done. What does done mean for the project? And then number four is the workflow intent. How are we going to work together? A project manager may facilitate the chartering process, but the big idea here is that a team can coalesce by working together, and the project charter is a great way to start working. Additionally, team members may want to collaborate in order to understand how they will work best together. Teams do not need a formal process for chartering as long as the teams understand how to work together. Some teams benefit from a team chartering process. And here are some chartering ideas for team members to use as a basis for their social contract. Team values, such as sustainable pace and core hours, working agreements, such as what ready means so that the team can take in work, what done means so the team can judge completeness and consistency, respecting the time box, or the use of work in progress limits. All of those are great examples of working agreements. You might also set up some ground rules, such as one person talking in a meeting. I have a ground rule. I have severe misophonia, which, if you don't know what that is, it is just food noises. I hate food noises. If I hear crunching chips or slurping cups, I get angry and frustrated. It's not a good thing. So one of my ground rules is like, hey, if we're in a meeting or if we're on a call, like, save your sipping and save your crunching for later, right? Like, that's just something that helps me work better with you. You might also set up group norms, such as how the team treats meeting times. Do we show up and read a document for the first 10 minutes and then jump into the meeting? Or do we jump right in? Or do you only have a certain number of people in the room and no more? Things like that. Remember that the team's social contract or its team charter is how the team members interact with each other. The goal of the team charter is to create an agile environment in which the team can work to the best ability as a team. It's not about a micromanager stepping in to dictate the process. Now, every project is run a little bit differently, even within the sphere of agile projects. In fact, mostly within the sphere of agile projects. That is the point of agile projects. But there are a few commonalities that you probably should be aware of. The single most important practice is the retrospective, because like a sports team reflecting on its game day performance, a retro allows the team to learn about, improve, and really adapt its process. Retrospectives or retros help the team learn from its previous work on the project and improve its process. One of the principles behind the Agile Manifesto is, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Many teams use iterations, particularly 2-week iterations known as sprints, because the iteration prompts a demonstration and a retrospective at the end. However, the team does not need iterations in order to retrospect. The team members can decide to retrospect at any key times. When the team completes a release or ships something, maybe that's a good time to retrospect. It doesn't have to be a monumental increment. It can be any release, no matter how big or how small. When more than a few weeks have passed since the previous retrospective, that might be a good time to retrospect. Or maybe when the team reaches any other significant milestone, take a moment to pause and reflect on that. Meet as a team, retrospect, figure out what you could improve, figure out what went well, do more of the things that went well, do less of the things that need improvement, or improve the things that need improvement. Really important, teams benefit from allocating enough time to learn, either from an interim retrospective or an end of the project retrospective. Teams need to learn about their work product and work process. For example, some teams have trouble finishing work. Maybe some of you can relate. When teams plan enough time, they can structure their retrospective in order to gather data, process that data, and decide what to try later as an experiment. First and foremost, a retrospective is not about blame. A retrospective is a time for the team to learn from previous work and make small improvements. The retrospective is about looking at the qualitative, how are people feeling, and the quantitative, sort of numerical measurements that are based in fact and data. Then using that data and those feelings to find root causes, design countermeasures, and develop action plans. The project team may end up with many action items that they need in order to remove impediments, and those are all good things to work towards. Another really important part of most agile projects is that teams use stand-ups to micro-commit to each other. They also use them to uncover problems and ensure that the work flows smoothly through the team. Something important to do here. One, always hold stand-ups. Stand-ups are a really good process, but time box the stand-up. Hopefully no longer than 15 minutes. If you need a stand-up that is longer than 15 minutes, I would argue either your team is too large or someone or several people on that team do not understand what a stand-up should be. The purpose of a stand-up is that the team should walk the task board in some way, and anyone from the team can facilitate the stand-up. It doesn't have to be a project manager, it can be anyone. And when I say walk the task board, even if it's a digital task board, you can sort of look at it and just walk through it step by step and see what each card is on the task board. In an iteration-based Agile, something like Scrum, everyone answers the following questions in a very round-robin fashion. You can popcorn it, you can just go around the table, whatever works. But you'll ask questions like, what did I complete since the last stand-up? What am I planning to complete between now and the next stand-up? And what are my impediments or blockers? Sometimes you might hear that phrased as risks or problems. Questions like these really generate answers that allow the team to self-organize. Again, we learned that that's really important, but also to hold each other accountable for completing the work that they committed to the day before and throughout the iteration. However, in flow-based Agile, has a little bit of a different approach to stand-ups, focusing on the team's throughput. The team assesses the task board from left to right, again, just walking the task board. The questions are, what do we need in order to advance this piece of work? Is anyone working on anything that is not on the board? What do we need to finish as a team? And are there any bottlenecks or blockers to the flow of work? Notice that this approach is less individualized and much more focused on a team. And again, flow-based Agile is more like a Kanban board. One of the anti-patterns that is typically seen in stand-ups is that they become status meetings. Teams who have traditionally worked in a predictive environment, something more sequential like a waterfall plan or waterfall method, they may tend to fall into this anti-pattern since they're a little bit more used to providing statuses. A tip that you can use to avoid this anti-pattern is to literally and physically have everyone who is able stand up in the meeting. The longer people are standing, the more they want the meeting to end. Thereby, the quicker they will answer the questions and avoid providing a status. I actually saw one more recently that I think is even more creative and more fun. Rather than standing up, make everyone do planks in the meeting. One, it improves your health, but also if you're doing a plank for longer than a minute, it starts to burn. So one, you're working on your core, which is good for you, but then two, you want to get out of there, and it keeps everything moving, which is really what a stand-up should be. It should not be a long 30-minute meeting that everyone gives a status and tries to clear those blockers. Another anti-pattern, speaking of blockers, that you typically see in stand-ups is that the team begins to solve problems as they become apparent. Stand-ups are for realizing that there are problems, not for solving them. When you catch that the tone of the meeting has shifted into problem-solving territory, kindly stop the conversation, add those issues to a parking lot. That's a grossly corporate term, but I'm going to use it here. Just sidebar that conversation, and then create another meeting for that topic, which, frankly, that meeting could be right after the stand-up. But solve the problems in that meeting where you are not holding up team members who maybe do not absolutely need to be a part of that conversation. That way they can sort of get back to the work that they need to do and not be inundated by meetings. The important thing here is that teams really need to run their own stand-ups. When run well, stand-ups can be very, very useful, provided that the nature of the team's work requires that level of intense collaboration. So make a conscious decision about when the team needs or can effectively use stand-ups, because it may not be daily, it might be weekly, it might be twice weekly, it might be every other week. All right, That's it for today. In our next lecture, we're going to talk about some of the various Agile frameworks. You've probably heard of some of them like Scrum or Kanban. I've mentioned a few of those in this lecture, but we're going to look at each one in depth. So I'll see you back here soon.